G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I just realised that this view has the unmade bed in the back corner, but before I deal with that, my drawing room doubles as a spare bedroom. I'm sure you know that feeling. But what is it that's holding you back from your drawing improvement? What is it that's making it hard to push on into the sorts of drawings that you have in your mind that you're able to draw, that you would be able to draw, that you'd like to be able to draw? What is it? What's holding you back? One of the biggest problems in working out what's stopping our drawing improvement is that we haven't actually worked out what our problem is. It's very hard to address an issue that we don't understand. But I think what's probably perhaps more common than we realize is that the problem that we think we have in our drawing, the reason why we think we can't improve, isn't the actual issue that we face. So, for instance, I might think that what's holding me back from drawing the drawings that I want to draw, the drawings that I see other people drawing, might be that I lack some sort of technical skill. I lack some sort of ability to put the marks on the paper that need to be put on the paper, such as I simply can't draw straight lines straight enough, long enough. I can't draw the angles correctly, so my perspective always looks wobbly. Things such as this. Now, if that's my real problem, then that's okay. But in my experience, when it comes to things such as perspective angles that aren't right, the problem isn't that the person isn't able to draw those angles, it's that they haven't seen those angles in the way they need to see them in their reference, whether it's in front of them or whether it's in a photo. Haven't seen those angles accurately enough, haven't found the visual information in the reference that's needed to accurately transfer that onto the paper. And so you could be continuously working on sort of drawing straight lines and practicing drawing straight lines when really it's observation that's the problem that needs to be worked harder at in order to improve from that position. Can you see what I mean? That if we don't understand what our problem is, what's holding us back, or what things are holding us back from drawing, then it's going to make it very difficult to address those issues. Now, just welcome to this chat. We've got some people on board now. I would love to have, in fact, I really will depend on having some questions to answer about issues that you think are holding back your drawing improvement, and I can give my thoughts about what may help push through. So I'd love to have some comments, and I'd also just love to hear where you're watching from. I'm in Sydney, Australia. It's a very wet, cold summer's morning, but we've come off some fairly warm, humid days, so it's actually wonderful to have that cool. Yep, just looking to see. I just jotted a few things down. Yeah, I've got to work on the key issues, on the important issue. In fact, look, I'd love someone just to say g'day in the chat, just so I know it's working. That would be great, because I haven't actually had any comment in the chat. So if you're able to say g'day, that would be great. And yeah, I've got a thumbs up. So yeah, if you'd like to give a like to this as well, that would be great. So what is it that you think is holding you back? And I think there are kind of two main areas that can block us from moving forward in our art. And one of them is sort of I think of as an exterior thing, and the other I think of as an interior thing. G'day, Jesse, and greetings to Southern California. Yeah, and so one is what I think of as the internal things that hold us back, and so this is where our personality perhaps comes into play. So whether I'm an adventurous, gung-ho sort of person, loves to try new things, whether I'm a fairly timid, self-controlled, like to do things the same way over and over again. Both of those can have their problems when I'm learning to draw. If I'm overly gung ho, if I'm very adventurous, if I love trying and doing new things, then I can end up always all over the place in what I do. In the drawings I try to do, perhaps I almost never draw the same subject twice. I like to pick up any different medium to use, and so I never stay in the one place long enough to actually improve. But equally, if on the other hand I've got a fairly timid personality, if I don't like to do things differently, if I like to kind of stay in what feels like a safe, predictable place, then that can be a big problem as well. Um, because I'm going to keep doing things, my process will tend to be the same way, and I will keep doing things the same way, and therefore um, I'm going to get the same results. And it's not really about the drawing or my ability to work through drawing and drawing issues, but the problem really is that I'm not letting myself do what I can do in terms of what I could do with a pen, because I'm letting my personality take control, rather than my mind, rather than my thinking, rather than trying to adopt a learning process. Because really, if I want to learn a skill, and that's what drawing is, learning a skill, then I need to adopt a learning process. And that can be really hard to do if I'm self-taught, if I'm navigating this journey, making all the decisions myself. If I do a course, if I have a teacher, then I've presumably paid someone to take responsibility for that, for making sure that I'm on a learning process. But when I'm doing it myself and I'm grabbing a bit here and a bit there, I'm looking up a video here, I'm Googling a problem there, it can be very hard to know exactly what I need to be doing to push through, to push on with whatever the issue is with my drawing. And I don't always have the understanding to identify where the problem is. But it's so important when I'm struggling to improve to work out why. What is the issue? Is it just my personality is not, the way I like things, what feels comfortable or non-threatening or fun and adventurous for me, that I'm letting that dictate what I do and how I do it? Or is it not so much the sort of in the internal workings of my mind, but is it actually that I do lack skills? Is the problem is I have a vague understanding of perspective, but I don't really understand it. I know it's a thing, but I don't really understand how it works, and I don't really understand how the videos, the input, wherever it's come from that I've had, will work when I go to do a drawing. There's a difference between watching learning input such as how to draw perspective and feeling that I understand the video. I feel that I understand the presentation, but then being able to go away and use that information when I do a drawing. It may be that I haven't quite caught on to everything, or, and this is more often the case than perhaps you think, the presentation I've watched is actually insufficient for my drawing needs. It's presented as a fait accompli. It's presented as a package. It's possibly being copied from another video without any particular necessary understanding from the person who's reposted it. And it might have been posted by someone who's never tried to draw architecture freehand themselves. And so aren't aware of what you need to connect a video with being able to then use that with actual drawing. I have a few playlists on perspective, but I have one on shortcomings of perspective videos that you might find interesting. But with all of that, um, uh, g'day, Indianapolis. Um, yeah, or maybe it's as simple as I'm just not drawing enough to learn. As I said, a learning process, which is what learning to draw is, and therefore improvement is really just another way of describing the learning to draw process and progress. As we progress along the learning to draw path, we improve, or at least we aim to. But it can be that really my problem is I'm just not drawing enough. I just perhaps was thinking that improvement would just happen regardless of how or when I drew. But it may be that doing a drawing once a month just isn't frequent enough for me to be able to remember the issues from the last drawing, and to sort of consciously build on them and work on them and perhaps research for them in between. And so it's as simple as that. I just have too big a gap between my drawing experiences to really start to consolidate and build. And so it's not particularly how I think. It's not my fears. It's not my overconfidence, and it's not a lack of technical skills, but simply that I'm not giving myself enough time drawing to create the critical mass of kind of learning process that's going to that can build on it. Because the idea of improving is that we're building on what's happened before. So we need to build, and we need to build so that what we did last time is still there. It hasn't kind of blown away, been worn away. Hugo, what are you asking? I find that drawing with a Sharpie marker forces me to draw quickly and commit. It's good practice. Yeah, yeah. And look, that's one of the reasons I switched to drawing with a pen as opposed to pencil. I had a lot of perfectionism issues to have to deal with, and I found that ironically, as my drawing became better, my perfectionism became worse, because the better I thought I could draw something, the more demanding I became that it had to be right. And so I was erasing more and more lines that ironically were a lot closer to where they should have been than the ones perhaps I was leaving a bit earlier. But as I began to, I think, also be able to see what I was wanting to do more accurately and in more detail, then that made it more demanding for me to keep erasing. And honestly, some of my drawings, I felt like I spent half the drawing going backwards, and it became incredibly frustrating erasing so much. And then sometimes you'd end up just leaving a graphite smear on the paper that you couldn't then remove, or you damage the paper surface or something. So I kind of got sick of that, and I wanted to be able to learn to draw with the pen anyway. We had a trip coming up in 2020, which finished up being cancelled with COVID, but I was wanting to sort of sit in the streets of Europe and draw, and and I thought I'd love to do that in a pen rather than a pencil. But I also thought this will force me just to push on with my drawing. And so that's what I did. I switched from pencil to pen. And if you go back some years in my YouTube, in my Instagram account, you'll see where I stopped drawing in pencil and started drawing pen. And I basically kept drawing the same way. Well, no, I didn't actually, because I switched to eventually to freehand drawing only in ink. So, um, yeah, and as Hugo says, when you draw in pen, there is no going back. You can only go forward. And what I learnt was a lot of things that I once would have thought would have ruined the drawing actually are just part of the drawing process, and I can work them in. I can build them in. They're either not such a problem, or they just become. I can overwork them in a way that looks satisfactory, or I could you just don't notice them at the end. Then they're just not nearly as prominent at the end as they looked when I first did them. I have a few videos on dealing with mistakes, and one of the points I make is that they always look worse when you've just made them, and we tend to make mistakes at the very start of our drawing, because that's the hard part. That's the part where we need to go slowly and carefully, well, relatively, I mean, compared to how we go at the end, where our marks are being made more slowly, and more cautiously, because we're having to establish our reference points, and we're still possibly even getting in our mind what we're trying to do and narrow the possibilities for how we continue our drawing. So, um, yeah, but if we can't go backwards, then if we can only go forwards, if we can't erase, then I all of those struggles, oh, is that good enough or not? Oh, I better remove it just to be sure. I don't want it to ruin all of that becomes just there's no point, not possible. So yeah, yeah. So look, if part of your problem is that you get very frustrated with perfectionism and with using the eraser all the time, then I really can recommend pick up a pen and just draw and not expect to do artwork. Say to yourself, I'm learning to draw. It's a drawing exercise. If I was learning the piano, I wouldn't start trying to produce a concert piece. I'd be doing scales and I'd be doing really simple tunes. I'd just be doing really a few maybe chord progressions or just playing a few notes that you can play with a few fingers. I wouldn't be trying to do a finished piece. And yet, so often when we learn to draw, for some reason, well, I think because we don't really understand that it's a skill and a learning process, we put this pressure on us to be able to produce artworks right from the word go. And when we can't, it proves that we just can't do it and we shouldn't bother to try, that we just don't have the talent. So let's have a look at a few more of these questions. Jesse, my problem has been too many YouTube videos and not enough actual drawing. Yeah. And so the question is, Jesse, why is that? Presumably you want to draw and that's why you started watching the YouTube videos, but then they become a substitute for actually drawing. It's a bit like going to art shops and buying more art supplies can become a substitute for actually using them. And, probably for most of us, it connects with being afraid of messing it up, being afraid that it won't work out. Um, it could be something else, but it's important to kind of identify what's happening. Now, we can still choose to do whatever we want. There's nothing wrong with just watching YouTube videos on drawing because we find them interesting and entertaining. But if my aim really is to be able to draw, then I've fallen into an unhelpful place to be. And maybe what I need to do is to take control of my YouTube watching, my YouTube drawing video watching schedule, plan. Maybe I need to have a plan and actually start to work out, well, why am I watching these and what am I watching? And is part of the problem I've got these channels that I watch because they're fun and entertaining, but if I'm honest, I'm really not getting things from them that actually inform my drawing, because there's nothing wrong with watching them, but maybe in my mind, I have to be no longer thinking that they're part of my drawing learning. They're part of my online entertainment, and that's fine. But I need to make sure I'm finding videos to watch that actually help me in my drawing, that make me want to draw rather than watch another video. I mean, my hope is that when you watch one of my drawings, you want to stop watching the video and go and try and do the drawing if it's a drawing demo based video, or if it's a more of a process driven thing, that understanding process of drawing more encourages you to give it a go, to actually start to draw or start to draw again. So yeah. Um, so here's a comment from Grabs You Are, and you need to actually draw in meaningfully sized segments and time to truly improve. Yeah, and that's what I guess I was getting at with the comparison with the piano practice. When we draw, it's the length of the session and it's the frequency of the session. If and I don't know whether you've heard some of my videos where I talk about the learning cycle, that we tend to learn when we're learning a task within cycles of the task. And so the drawing cycle is starting and finishing the drawing. And within that process, we have the whole sort of gamut. We have the what will I draw? What am I trying to draw? How will I do it? How will I start it? How will I process it? How will I bring it together at the end and have something at the end? And then after that, how have I gone? If we're self-taught, we need to mark our own work. We're the teacher as well as the student. So I need to say, how have I done? And work out then now what's my aim for the next drawing? What do I need to keep practicing? What can I move on from? And so it's a cycle. So basically the cycle is every drawing. Now, if we only, you know, do 5-minute drawings, say, then what we're aiming for is being able to do 5-minute drawings well. So it probably needs to be a bit longer than that. But I think the biggest mistake that beginners make, or one of the biggest mistakes they make, is to try and do something that's too large and too challenging, that takes too much time, and that they don't have a great chance of doing well or even finishing, either because it just ends up taking too long for the way they're trying to draw it, or they get discouraged with how it looks and give up. Now, either way, the learning cycle of producing a drawing and then using it at the end to work out where I need to go next hasn't been finished. And so there's no going past that point. It's why when children learn piano, the actual practice sessions are, relatively short, maybe, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, might get to 30 minutes. Um, but they're frequent. And so it's this balance between doing something that I have a chance of, and partly the reason why the piano lessons time slots are so short when they're kids is it's matching their ability to stay focused. Because if I can't stay focused for the whole time, I'm doing it for too long. Yeah. Um, if I end up becoming so tired that I'm not caring, then I'm learning to do whatever it is I'm doing badly. And I don't need practice at that. That comes easily enough. So I need to make sure that my session is long enough that I can stay focused, but that it's frequent enough that I can remember the things I've learned. And I need to make sure that I get to the end of the learning cycle in each session, that I finish the drawing. I mean, so many people say that they have real problems finishing drawings. But what that means is, from a learning point of view, is that I never learn the skills that you only learn in the second half of the drawing. So it's, yeah, I need to kind of push myself. I need to be the teacher who says, no, finish that. Don't leave another drawing half done. I want you to finish that. And then you can work out what you're going to do next. But if I continually can't finish things, then almost certainly I'm trying to do things that are too hard. I'm trying to do them in a way that's too time consuming. And I'm probably trying to do them in a way where I'm not happy with the results, because it's it's when I kind of half fear I'm wasting my time that I can think, oh, look, it's not worth finishing. It won't turn out. They never turn out. Well, if they never turn out, things need to change. You know, my process needs to change, and process includes the way I think. Often, I think the problem is that we simply start off thinking, I'm just going to do a copy of this. That when I draw from a photo, I'm just copying the photo, and that is a very inadequate. I believe, even if you're into photorealism, it's a very inadequate and unhelpful, very limited way to view the drawing process. And so I think it's at that point, part of what we need to do to improve is to come to understand what's happening in the drawing process more. It's not just copying. At least it's not the sort of drawings that probably have inspired you to want to draw. You'll find that whoever drew them has understood the process of what they're trying to do in a more sophisticated way, and that's in the end what's guided them in developing their technique, their style, and in producing the drawings that they've got. You can't, you can't really, um, kind of learn what they've done without understanding their thinking. Um, Otherwise, we're really just trying to copy. It's a bit like those perspective videos that make sense when we see them, but then we can't somehow absorb them into our drawing and get benefit from them. Um, Severus Snape. I always start to learn to draw, do it for 1 month and lose the motivation and stop drawing long enough for me to start all over again once I get yes. Yeah. So look, in the end, it depends why I'm drawing. If I'm just drawing for a bit of fun entertainment every now and then, it's something I like to do occasionally. Then that's great. We all don't have to become, Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo in our drawing. Um, but if I want to learn to draw, if I really want to develop a skill, to learn and develop a skill, then I have to understand that to get somewhere will take work and effort because learning any skill takes work and effort. Um, One of my kids loves soccer, and they've spent their whole life playing soccer and still play soccer as an adult. But that didn't mean they had to go and do hard slog at training week in and week out, and with friends at other times, just kicking a ball around, casually between themselves. Incredible hard work went into that. At times really was hard work, hard to get up and go to training when it was raining and muddy and all of that. But you don't get the benefit in any skill without doing that. And so it really just comes down to where do I want to be at the end? And I need to be realistic about what it takes to get there. As I said, there's nothing wrong with just drawing for the pleasure of the moment in drawing, whether it's a 5-minute pleasure or a 60-minute pleasure, just playing around. That's absolutely fine. And lots of people do that. Great. Because we're only doing, no one has to draw. We're doing it because we choose to do it. But if when I look at drawings that other people have done, develop drawings, it really stirs something in me. And there's this feeling that I would love to be able to develop those skills and be able to draw like that. Then I need to acknowledge that, well, then what I'm wanting to do is learn the piano, learn French, learn how to kick a ball, learn how to write code for a computer, whatever. That's the sort of thing I'm wanting to do, and it's going to require the sorts of thinking and progress to get there. And maybe part of the problem is that with some things, such as say learning computer code, that we can't just start to do that ourselves. We have to at the very least get a book, a workbook to follow and to develop. We probably have to go to a course. If it's piano, we're probably going to have lessons at least at the start. So, these aren't things that we would try and do totally ourselves. We would find a course, a curriculum, something. But with drawing, we can just pick up a pen and start to make marks on a bit of paper without any input from anybody at all. And perhaps that's part of the reason when we start, we can end up drawing for quite some time, but in some ways, sort of chugged around in circles, and we've enjoyed it, but we've got frustrated by it as well because we're not getting to the place that we feel we want to get to, that we've seen other people get to. Does that ring a bell for anyone? Let's have a look at some more of these questions. Um, so, um, so Severus, make a schedule and keep to it. I mean, I heard an artist give a talk once, and he said the most important thing if you're an artist, like the really crucial thing, the thing that probably makes you an artist, certainly the things that enables you to be an artist, is that you have your art time. And if it's 8:30 Monday morning, you start your art. Then at 8:30 Monday morning, you've got the clothes on that you wear when you create your art. You've got the materials that you use to create your art, and you're in the place where you create your art, and you start. And it comes down to that. that it's not a case of when you're lying in bed at 7 a.m. Monday morning thinking, will I create art or not? No, I'm an artist. This is what I do. So I get up and I start regardless of how I feel. And I don't know if anyone else would agree with this, but I know there are times when I really struggle to sit down and start to draw. Procrastinating before starting anything is a huge thing. At least with painting, you could think, oh, well, I can always with oils paint, which is what I was doing. I can always overpaint it if I don't like it later. But with drawing, like it's on the paper, it's there. Um, it can be intimidating to start all that white sheet in front of you. Yeah, can be intimidating. But what I've learned is that when I start, within a couple of minutes, I'm thinking, oh, I should have started this earlier. This is great, and once I start to breathe the creative air of drawing, yeah, a lot of the procrastination has gone. I'm really in the process. My focus now is on what I want to do. So if we can disconnect actually starting with how I feel and just say, well, it's the time I'm going to start, so I'm going to start. That in itself is a huge breakthrough in improving. I better hurry with some of these comments. Conrad, I really love your videos about trees. I'm trying to improve my architectural drawings with some foliage. How do you approach shading clumps of leaves and where to place them to really show it's 3D? Um, Look, the first thing is I mean, careful observation of what we're trying to draw is really important. Now, I'm assuming we're drawing from a reference, that we're not modeling this from our imagination. But even if we are wanting to draw from our imagination, that that our imagination is simply the things that we've seen filed away in our brain. So I can't go and get out of the filing drawer a picture of a tree that I haven't filed in there. So even if I want to draw from imagination, the way I prepare for that is to uh, observe carefully as many trees as I can, as much foliage as I can. Now, the thing with foliage is that most of the time we're not trying to draw the foliage with the leaves because there's too many. We're trying to draw the effect of the leaves, of all the leaves together. And so leaves, trees, foliage, great example for drawing the effect of detail, not drawing all the detail. The other important thing with trees is that the same tree will look different according to how far away it is. And trees have a certain scale. Now their leaves are all different sizes. Um, and so for the same distance from a tree with very large leaves, I might still be seeing lots of individual leaves. Whereas another tree with very small leaves at the same distance, I may not actually even be able to see any leaf. It may be a bit of a green blur. Well, it's the bit of a green blur that we're trying to draw and create. And often, in my experience, we do that through our hatching. We actually don't draw the leaves, but we draw the way the leaves catch the light and the dark. And so, mostly, I draw trees through hatching. Just the other, I mean, I've got a playlist on how to draw trees. And I think there's a lot of kind of fundamental problems with perhaps how people conceptualize the tree drawing process, because there is this we know too much about trees, and we try to draw what we know, which is that full of leaves, rather than what we see, rather than through observation, because most of the time when we look, we don't see the individual leaves. So this is where the observation, I need to not draw what I think I've seen, which is individual leaves, but draw what I have seen, which is just the effect of massed leaves. And what I usually also don't have is a heavy outline, continuous line around the perimeter of the tree canopy or the various foliage clumps. And yet, again, so often that's the mark that people make, a long, continuous dark line. And that creates a cartoon effect, a very two-dimensional, oversimplified effect. So it keeps coming back to observation. I've got a playlist with 4 or 5 videos on observation for drawing. They were some of the first videos I made because I knew even then it was such an important topic. If you haven't seen them, I'd I really recommend having a look. I probably should do them again, remake them because I guess I've had more understanding with the drawing of the last few years about it. But so much of the time, especially with subjects that we feel familiar with, our problem is that we don't observe what's there in front of us. We start to slide into what I know. Um, but foliage is a fantastic companion to architecture in a drawing because it opens up all sorts of visual contrast possibilities of the type of mark and of the values that we create. And if you're finding this helpful, please remember to hit the like button for me. That would be great. Um, and remember to check out my playlist if you haven't seen them. Um, Delane, right. G'day there, me too. I don't know, drawing after drawing, it seems like my work is getting worse and worse, and more instruction I try to take. It's very discouraging. Look, it may be, Hamill, it may be that what's actually happening is that you're coming to understand what you're trying to do more, and you're being able to see the things in the drawings that you look at for instruction and inspiration more and more. And so you're becoming more aware of the challenge of learning to draw. And that's actually that's a huge step forward. One problem people often have when they start is that they don't know enough to know that they're not doing very well. And particularly if they perhaps had very low expectations of how well they were going to be able to draw, sometimes people are, you can be sort of, what's the best way to put it? Overly pleased with your work, pleased perhaps beyond where you should be pleased. Now, there's a fine line between a healthy, like, I did well. It's not perfect, but I did well, you know, and I'm amazing when perhaps that's a bit premature because anyone can look at what I've done, or anyone else can look at what I've done and see that there are lots of issues. So yeah, it's a fine line to walk, and depending on our natural balance place for how we think about ourselves and what we do, sometimes people can be unfairly tough, can have unreasonable expectations of how much they're going to improve, how quickly. And so the actual improvement isn't happening, but visualizing in your mind what you want is so important. So if you can see where your drawings are falling short, then that's a huge hugely advantageous place to be. I know that my largest improvement sort of steps have always been taken when I've been able to look at my drawings consistently, like look at quite a number of drawings that I've done and be unhappy about the same thing in them. So I kept looking at my drawings, being unhappy with the values, unhappy that I didn't seem to go darker, as dark as I wanted to. And at some point, I got sick of it and just jumped in and began to make things darker because it became such an issue. And I was able to really work on it. And I was able to choose some subjects that would force me to go dark because they had very dark extremes. And that let me kind of push through that kind of barrier I'd set up for whatever reason to going as dark as I wanted to go to create the visual drama that high contrast often creates. But I had to do, you know, you know, in a sense, I had to become unhappy enough with the drawings I was doing to get to that point, to get to the point to sort of push me into a different process to kind of get me out of the comfort, because obviously the reason I was doing so much mid value was because I was lacking confidence to kind of commit to the more extreme. Other people, their problem's the opposite. They go out too far, too fast, too hard, too quickly, and and yeah, a little more restraint is what's needed to get the improvement that they want or that they need. Let's have a look. Um, the other thing, Hamill, that you can do is to um, maybe you're simply trying too hard. The subjects you're trying to do are just too far along. You need to pull back and do some simpler things. I mean, I would always say that, like, as a teacher, if you're teaching someone something, there is no point giving them something they have no chance of doing well. That's just going to discourage them. And they're certainly not going to learn by never succeeding. But so often I see people learn to draw again because we can just start it ourselves without any input, drawing perhaps the subjects that enthuse them. So if, like me, you like architecture, if you like really ornate, grand, imperial architecture, whatever, um, drawing stuff that's like where yeah, if you were being realistic, you'd be saying, "This is what I hope to be able to draw." But in the enthusiasm and perhaps ignorance of the learning process, we start there and then we always do badly. And the problem is we will just get discouraged, or we won't realize we're doing it badly, and we'll kind of blunt our ability to discern the issues that we need to see so that we can correct them. But always the starting point for anything is something I have a chance of doing well. And there's no point going past that. Okay, another question. Um, you have thousands of bad drawings inside of you, and you have to keep drawing to get them out and get to the good drawings. Oh, hang on. How about drawing directly from the imagination? Yeah, Hugo, I kind of mentioned that a bit earlier, that when we draw from imagination, we're actually drawing from things we've previously observed. So if I were to say to you, imagine, and then I explain something that you've never seen and you've got no concept of what it is, well, you really can't draw it from, you can't draw that from your imagination. You can create something totally unseen by anyone, but you can't draw something I have in my mind that you've never imagined or seen. You know, we draw things from our imagination because we've stored memories. And the problem is that if I go to draw from my imagination and I haven't stored enough memories of what that thing looks like under certain conditions, from certain distances, viewed from certain angles, then I can't draw it. I'm guessing, basically. And that's so often the case, that even things that we're quite familiar with through general life, we haven't seen enough to draw. Like, I know what people look like. I've had lots of years on this earth looking at people's bodies and seeing them. But if I haven't tried to draw figures from very different angles and extremes, then I probably don't have the visual information stored that I need. Because in everyday life, I don't look at people from extreme angles. I don't lie on the ground and look up at them as they walk past me. I don't stand above them and look down on them. But these might be things, if I want to draw figures, say, for cartoon work, for comic work, that these are angles I need to have, but I don't have them from my everyday life observation. I actually need to study them to put the references into my mind as to how perspective works with figures from extreme angles. I need to find that, see it, learn it, memorize it, and then store it. And then when I go to draw from imagination, I've got the reference material that I need. So, yeah. Um, Christina, I really want to learn how to draw, but really struggle with drawing shapes. What do I do? Look, it's a little hard to answer that just knowing exactly what you mean. I like to think of two different things when we draw. One is drawing shapes and one is drawing form. And I think of shapes as a two-dimensional thing, and I think of form as a three-dimensional thing. So, for instance, here's this here's this little wonder boom. Okay, so that has a shape. It has a shape with kind of a slightly rounded line here and here. It's got a flat line on top and a flat line on the bottom, and it's sort of got some other curved bits. Now, if you were to draw that so as a shape that you could cut out like a silhouette, then that's a shape. So this could easily be reduced to a shape. So we have hang on. Yeah. See? So we draw this line on the paper, flat bit, and on the other side. Now, when I'm drawing, that's part of it. Seeing the shape is important. Seeing the silhouette is important. However, when I draw, if what I'm trying to focus on is drawing that shape, I end up often with very hard lines all around the outside. And yet, this isn't a shape in life. This is a form. This is a three-dimensional form. Now, I'm going to draw it on a two-dimensional sheet of paper, which is why thinking shapes sort of can work better. But I want to create the feel, the look, the effect of a three-dimensional form rather than a two-dimensional shape. And so while my form will be the shape, if I'm looking at it like this, the lines, the marks I make, I may end up with a very light line here where the light is hitting it, and because this isn't a flat edge, what I'm looking at is a surface curving away from me, and visually that creates a different effect to say this line up the top, which is a harder line because it's not curving away from me in the same way, and so forth, and the visual effect of this side in with the shadow on it is much stronger. So maybe I want a stronger line here and a lighter line here to help sort of create this effect. So I'm drawing shapes, but I'm thinking forms when I draw it. Does that make sense, Christina? Um, but again, if you're struggling with what you're doing, dial it back a little bit and work at some simpler shapes, some simpler forms, so that you can complete the cycle, the learning cycle faster, and that you have a chance of succeeding. Okay. So, when we were at school, we were doing a subject, we wouldn't move on to new work until most of us had mostly mastered the work we'd been doing, because there's no point moving on if you haven't done what you need to do as sort of a prerequisite. So, and in something such as drawing, we learn, develop skills that we then build on, and then once we've learnt them in a simple context, we can learn to apply them in a more sophisticated way. Okay, so Hugo, you have thousands of bad drawings inside of you. You have to keep drawing to get them out and get to the good drawings. Yeah, look, I don't like. It depends what we mean by bad, but I think the problem is we draw too much without thinking about process. We draw too much without thinking about understanding. And so if we do things from the same place within us, from the same understanding, then we're going to end up with the same results. What we draw, what we do comes from how we think and our understanding. And so I need to. It's not just trying harder. And so just practicing, if my practice is the same every time, won't necessarily improve what I do. It may just entrench me in bad habits, which doesn't mean I can't get out of them, but it can be frustrating if I'm putting lots of time into lots of drawings. What I have to do is to stop doing them the same way. I need to change things, and I think my last video actually was to do with that, of ways we could change what we do, our drawing process, to shake things up and help us to find where the roadblock issues might be. Um, okay. Thanks, Herman. Yeah, yeah. Drawing the heads. Yep, yep, yep. Herman, is been drawing lots of heads every day, heads from different positions, to work at. Well, I presume work at figure drawing, and again, I mean, sometimes we just break things down so that we focus on what we need to focus. And so if I'm doing figure drawing, but it's my head, it's drawing heads, not my head, but it's drawing heads. It's the heads that I draw that are the problem. Then yeah, I can save time I can fast track my learning by just concentrating on the thing that's causing the problem for me. Um, if I'm drawing streetscapes and my trees always look less well drawn than my architecture because maybe I draw the architecture quite well, but my trees always look childish. Then I should just work on trees if I want to start to produce better drawings. Because what I need to do is to bring my tree drawing skill up to the level of the other things that are in the drawing. Similarly, if my figures in the street always look awkward, um, then I can just work on drawing figures for the streetscape. But that's going to be very different to if I'm drawing figures as the main event, as the main thing that we're looking at, as the focal point of our scene. So yeah, yeah. So concentrated time working on particular things is important. We think of the piano, we think of scales. The skill of moving the fingers quickly over lots of keys is obviously really important, and becoming comfortable in that. And once we've learned that skill just playing the scales, we can then apply it to particular music score, and we can um, um, vary the notes that we hit. Okay, let's have a look. Yes, once you start to draw, you do get hooked to it. Zikracam. Thank you very much, Stephen. My pleasure. You have no idea how much I needed to hear your insight that you shared in the last few minutes. Thank you. Well, I'm always glad to help. Peak site. I've been drawing for about 2 years and practice shapes and lines, heads, but still can't get complicated shapes and head. I have school and exams, so I don't always have time to practice. Yep. And then they say, I can imagine how to do the drawing well, but when put it into paper, it still turns out bad. Okay. Look, firstly, yeah, we do have to juggle our drawing with whatever else is happening in our life. And if I'm at an art school, then clearly it's going to be a higher priority because it's working probably to a place of greater importance in my life than if I'm at school and I have all these other subjects, or I'm at college, but I'm doing not an art related course. So this really is like part of my hobby life, my entertainment life, just things I get to choose to do or not do. So that makes the whole process very different. And we need to realize that life has swings and roundabouts, that there are times where I can do more drawing or any discretional thing than other times. So that's all okay. I need to be realistic and not give myself a hard time. What I do need to do though is try and keep my toe in the water. So even if it's a 10-minute drawing every third day, that might be achievable. Like yeah, the problem may be that I'm trying to do more than I can reasonably do. So that really just sets me up for frustration. Um, and it also makes it harder then for the things that I should be doing because I'm probably not doing them. So I don't want to do a lot of things badly. So I need to kind of juggle and balance all my responsibilities. Um, whether I'm doing this as part of a major part of my life, or whether it's just a little add-on to bring a little joy and pleasure to me sometimes. Um, yeah. And look, peak site, I would say, I take it from my age point of view. You're relatively young. If you've been consistently practicing at something and you're struggling to do it well, then there's either something specific that you're not understanding about what you're doing, and so it can be, yeah, and it may be something that you're not going to see yourself at this point of your development, or else you would have seen it. So you know, um, if there's someone you can ask what's not working, if you can get some other eyes, um, if you can see yourself and identify yourself, what's not working, like the more detail we get, it's so important to critique. It's so important to look at our drawings afterwards and say, what's not working here in the way I would like it to work. And this isn't being down on myself or tearing myself down or whatever. This is setting myself up for success in my next drawing. The mistakes that I accept, I will never go beyond. I will always have them in my drawing. It's only the things that don't work, that don't look right, that don't take my drawing to the place I want it to be. It's only by focusing on those that I remove them, that I actually learn to push through them to create the sorts of scenes I want to create. As an artist, I can choose so many things. I can choose so much about, do I want my drawing to have a sense of realism, to look real in some way, or do I want to have deliberate distortion that creates this, to me, more interesting and more engaging visual world? Well, I get to choose, Um, but whatever it is, whatever place I want to get to, I also need to work out what I need to do to get there, if I'm self-taught, if I'm not paying someone to instruct me. So it's really important, I think, to have a sense of where am I trying to go, because I need that when I critique my drawings to see, have I got there in this drawing? I keep saying mistakes are our friends because they guide and direct us, so that we don't go there again, or it shows me where I need to focus. And again, I think I've got a video that talks about the drawing learning cycle, where we learn in a cycle. We learn from having a reference we want to draw, from having something in our head we want to draw, something in front of us we want to draw. We draw it, and then we get to see, have I achieved it? And that's the cycle. I have to be inspired to do something. I do it, and then I assess what I've done. I mark my work, in effect, and that then gives me direction for where I go in my next learning cycle. And it doesn't matter so much whether it's a 20-minute drawing or a 240-minute drawing. It's still a drawing cycle. So why spend 3-4 hours doing a big drawing that's got the same problems that a drawing with the same sort of things in it would have if I drew it in 30 minutes? Why not draw a simplified version in 30 minutes, have the same weaknesses, but just not take as long to draw them? And then after 30 minutes, identifying what's not working, working out how can I change my marks or my thinking or what I do in some way to get closer to what I want, and then start again. Instead of 200 and instead of 240 minutes, how many 30 minutes are in 240 minutes? I don't know, a lot, but I can have a lot of drawing cycles if I do 30-minute drawings, many times more learning cycles than if, yeah, it takes me 4 hours to do one cycle, because all it means is I've spent more time in the 4-hour drawing cycle doing stuff that doesn't look right. Well, I should have done that in a shorter time period, because it's the same lesson I'm learning. Same lesson I'm learning. And it's interesting. One of the reasons I think my drawing has improved in my thinking in terms of where I want it to go a lot in the last 2 years, it's not just that I've been doing more drawing, but because of the YouTube videos and just the practicality of how long will people watch for and how fast can I speed things up and all of this, I've been doing smaller drawings than I say did for Instagram. The actual drawings are smaller. And yeah, I came to realize that this was actually fast tracking my learning because I learned things far more quickly. And also, I always had time to do a cycle because my drawing was going to be my YouTube video drawings are anything between 20 and say 65 minutes, mostly around the 25 to 35 minutes. And so, and I always look at them and at the end, and I mean, I do what I say to do. And I look at them at the end and I think, well, what would I do differently if I were redrawing this right now? And I think about that because, as you know, a lot of my drawings have the same recurring subjects and lights and conditions and things. And so by keeping that learning cycle short, I learn a lot more than if it took a lot of time to do, and therefore became less available to me. So if I need 4 hours to do a drawing, well, maybe there's only 2 days a month where I've got half a day free to do that. And that's the other problem. The easier I make it to learn, the faster potentially I can learn. And so that's what I think I need to be doing. That's the focus I need to have. Um, um, Let me have a look. I'm just going back to the chat here. Oh, look, here is my dear wife with a cup of tea. I've got some water, darling. Thank you. I said to her when I started, darling, if I'm still talking after an hour, can you bring me a cup of coffee? So, yep. And oh, look, it's an hour and 1 minute. So I am very well served here. Oh, this very dreary Monday morning in Australia. Well, in Sydney anyway. Adriana, hi Stephen, thank you for your videos. They help a ton. God bless you. Hugs from Brazil. Well, blessings back to you, Adriano in Brazil. Thank you. That's encouraging. Stephen, are you Australian? Yes, I am Australian. There you go. I'm in live in Sydney, Australia. So, unlike probably most people watching this, we're moving into summer. And it's about time too. The older I get, the less I can really cope with the cold, I think. Drawing on my Loomis head from imagination, I can do that because I have the age and a lot of stored memories of heads. Yeah, that's right, German, because we can't draw from imagination what we haven't put in our heads. But yeah, yeah. But what we need to observe for drawing is different to what we need to observe for everyday life in most instances. So, yeah, so it's not just that I've seen heads, but as an artist or as a wannabe artist, I've been observing people imagining how I would draw them, and I think back and I realize that for most of my life, even though I had decades and decades where for all sorts of reasons I didn't do any art at all, I was still thinking about it. I would sit in bumper to bumper traffic twice a day on peak hour, with the sun low in the sky, either rising or setting, and watching it go through the tree canopies. And I'd be thinking, how would I paint that? How could you represent that with a brush, with color, with value? And when I did begin to finally paint when I was 50, that's what I did. I did, tree canopies and sort of yellow canopies. That's a wattle tree behind me. And having done all that observation, even and thinking about how would I paint with it, even with decades of not actually picking up a paintbrush with it, but having been observing and thinking, really paid off. It really sped up what I did. Now, I also love looking at architecture, and I love looking at the perspective angles, and I love looking at the shadows and just the whole thing, the whole caboodle. And again, when I finally began to, not that I draw architecture from imagination, but having been intensely observing it as an artist who wasn't drawing at that point, helped me, I'm sure. Because even if I don't draw from imagination, if I've stored lots of references in my head, then when I see something in front of me or in a photo, um, I'm still further ahead. Like I know the things to look at. I've trained my observation of architecture or trees or whatever it is I've been observing. And as I think I started this session saying, um, a lot of the problem that we have when we draw is that we're not observing what we need to observe, but we don't realize that. We think, well, I know how to look at something. I know how to see something. I've been looking at things my whole life. We don't really appreciate that there's a certain skill in observing for drawing to see the things we need to see to draw them accurately that we don't need to see in the same way for everyday life. And this means then we constantly, every time someone has a problem with proportions, it's because I haven't seen the proportions enough in what I'm drawing to transfer them. So, if raise your hands, everyone who has a problem with proportions, getting proportions accurate. If I do, it's because I haven't observed them carefully enough. And that's what I need to work on. But see, we can work on. Sometimes our problem is we do whole drawings that take up a drawing cycle when we have such fundamental flaws that we'd be better off focusing on a smaller skill. So, for instance, with proportions, if proportions are a problem, then just work on you learning to see the proportions more accurately. So get a whole lot of drawings, a whole lot of photos, and just work at drawing, and not the scene, but just an outline of part of the architecture, and then really not doing all the detail, and then working out, are my proportions correct? Try if you try and draw at the same size as your reference, it becomes much easier to check that the proportions are the same or they're not. And I'd probably recommend that too, because you see, and it's also easier to do if you're doing it the same size. And so if we're learning, we make it easy for ourselves. For all the people who have a problem that their drawings always go off the top of the page or the bottom or off to one side, then what I need to do to get out of that is to print my reference the size I want my drawing to be and work at keeping it the same. And then I can, when I've learned to control it in the easiest context, which is the same size, I then can learn to draw smaller or larger than I need to, than the reference. So, okay, missing Heredia, how to place the right perspective on paper when the vanishing points are off the sheet. Look, I've actually got a relatively recent video on just that. So it's a little complex to try and just explain. I was going to say over the phone, just like this. But I think the video is literally called how to draw perspective when the vanishing points are off the page. If you just if you just put in the search thing for my channel, vanishing points, I'm sure it'll come up. But it's, it was a few months ago now, but it can be very useful knowing how to do that. Matt, g'day, Matt. Do I have a preferred method for shipping art on paper rolled up in an envelope? Mostly drawn from. Okay, yeah. Look, I do sell some prints and sometimes some original drawings. What I do, I'm just looking up because what I send them in is just up here. I just don't know whether I could get something down without pulling everything down on my head. No, here I go. With A4 drawings, this is what I use. Here's a plug for IKEA. I use the IKEA A4 frames. These cost in Australia a couple of dollars, which in America is probably about 50 cents, because they're very light and they're very strong. And so, someone buys a number of prints, I put them all in this, and then I wrap this in bubble wrap and then wrap that in just some brown paper with the address on it. and I find these really sturdy and yeah, so and very light, which is important. Postage is really expensive from Australia to the world. The world, most of the world seems to be so far away from us. Um, yeah, so that's how I do that. Um, Jomo, what are you saying? However, my main goal is to learn the basic form of the head. So now how light hits the head, and for that I don't need a reference, just a simplified model which I can rotate around. Yeah, yeah, that's right. So, working on the thing that you want to do, and in some ways simplifying it, removing all the things that you don't need to or want to work on at that point is a really important way of fast tracking. So, if we were learning a language, we would tend to, you know, you're always using what you've done before, but there's the focus of that chapter, that term, whatever. Um, and so it might be past tense, it might be um, depending on the language, it might be the subjunctive or whatever. So yeah, so but doing a lot of the thing that you particularly want can really have dividends, pay dividends later. Um, just aim as you do with it on the paper. I assume you're not drawing the construction lines, but feel them. Um, in my drawing process, yeah, I mean, I don't particularly draw from imagination unless I'm just adding something into the composition, like a minor part. But um, the main part of my drawing, I'll have in my reference or I'll have in front of me because that's the way I like to do it. But yes, visualizing what's there is important. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Rather than say feel them, I'd say I visualize them. I sometimes, if I'm having trouble with perspective angles and stuff, I will try and visualize where the vanishing point is if it's off the page. But I don't actually draw them and I don't actually try and plot it, but I will think, well, it's going to be about there. And then that can help me align the fan shape pattern more accurately. Uh, right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Hey, just started my pen drawing, V1 rotate. Your pilot. Thank you for sharing your knowledge on YouTube. Would you recommend using 2 or 3 reference photos to try to draw, or should I include variety in my learning? Look, I'm not 100% sure what you're asking there. Um, I would recommend that if you're learning to draw, then start with subjects that you really like to look at because you'll have already been looking at those and observing them more carefully. So if it's architecture, then start with architecture. Start with simple examples of architecture. There's no point trying to draw the Musée du Louvre if you can't draw a little simple cottage. It's a little simple box with 2 windows and a door. So start with a simple version of what it is that you really would like to draw under simple conditions. So don't go super extreme perspective, and then see how you go. Critique it at the end. What's worked, what's not worked. There's a huge amount of benefit in redoing an exercise, a drawing exercise, because you start where you left off with the other one. And so you start with all the things you're not happy with that you're now incredibly focused on. And, sometimes my demos, I might get, you know, I don't know, 30% in, and I'm really unhappy with what I've done. And it's not always that, "Oh, I've made a mistake," but, I've put some marks that now don't let me create a certain effect. that I realized would really work for the drawing. And so sometimes I'll start again, as I said, not because there's something that's actually wrong, but that I realized there was a better way I could have started to put marks and combine them and create the effect. I've gone too heavy or whatever. Um, and so what happens is that I'm now building on what I've just learned, and I'm doing it sort of straight away. And that that really helps you focus now on a better way. And when I redraw something I've drawn before, if it's relatively close to when I drew it, then that's a great learning thing, I think. Um, Particularly if it's I do it not necessarily immediately after, but if it's the next drawing that I do, I think that's a really helpful way to improve. And I think it's very encouraging too, because I finish up with a better drawing. And while if I'm learning to draw, I'm not producing artworks, I'm doing drawing exercises. And that's a really important mind shift to make. Part of the reason we procrastinate and we become perfectionistic is because we think we have to have an artwork at the end of the drawing. And if we haven't got an artwork, then it just proves I'm hopeless and I can't do anything. No, I'm learning a skill. If I were learning the piano, I wouldn't expect to be able to play a performance presentation at the end of the first lesson or at the end of the first week. So why do I think when I start to learn to draw that I'm going to be producing artworks? No, I'm producing drawing exercises the way I would be producing piano exercises at the end of the first week of learning the piano and so forth. So I need to, how we think is so important. And again, if I'm on a self taught journey, I can get into ways of thinking that are neither particularly accurate and certainly not helpful. If I'm in a course, if I have a teacher, then part of what I'm paying them to do is to get my head space in the right space. But as a self taught artist, I need to work out myself. Now, I'm pretty much a self taught artist and I've never studied art per se, but I am a trained teacher, so I've learned how we learn as part of my teacher education, back in the 70s. Um, and yeah, that's been so helpful at times to help me work out how I can improve, how I can get past the issues that I've had with my drawing and continue to have. Da, 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 da. Thanks, Hugo. Karim, I drew so good, even portraits, and I never taken a single class. I was just born with it. I have a unique way of drawing. Look, I would say, I would challenge that. I would say that you weren't actually born with it, but your life experiences have been such that fortunately for you, they've they've let you develop the skills that you need to draw well without realizing it. Um, yeah, and so I don't actually think there's particularly such a thing as talent. Um, I think there are skills to learn, but I think we all learn skills differently. Um, if you think of I mean, there are some things that some people are born with an advantage. So if you want to become good at basketball, it's an advantage if you're born 6'11" rather than 4'10". And if you're born 4'10", you probably can't overcome that to become a top basketball player. Um, but if you're born at 6'11", um, that will give you an advantage if you want to, but you still have to learn. It doesn't mean it will happen. You still have to learn, but it certainly sort of helps you. But beyond just kind of, physical abilities, um, yeah, I think pretty much we all start in a, um, um, we all start with the same, we all have the same skills and thinking and things that we need to learn to draw well. But some people learn those things through other means. So, for instance, I might have learnt to observe really carefully, I don't know, because I was a stamp collector when I was a boy, and I kept looking for mistakes in the stamps or something, and so I learned to really scrutinize hard to find things and to whatever. And when I go to learn to draw, those skills of observation, of scrutinizing, may be really useful for me, and it may actually give me a, if you like, an advantage over someone next to me learning to draw at the same time, but who never did that. And it's not that I'm more talented, but I happen to have already developed the skills that now serve me well. And if I'm struggling, it's not that I'm not talented. It's just that I haven't learnt the skills that I need to be able to draw it well. Um, and then I get to choose whether I want to try and learn them or not. Now, I'm not saying that we can all end up in the same place, because there's just too many variables. That will never happen. But can I progress to a better place? I certainly can, in terms of my drawing output. Okay. Um, German at 540 heads will be 1,000 by the end of the year. Look, it's great. It's great to have it. It's great to have a target. We don't want to be churning things out just for the sake of it, but it's tremendously helpful to say, I want to get to this place with my output, presuming my output stays helpful, that I give it that I give each unit the concentration it needs. But it can be great to have a goal, because my day is juggling so many competing things, that it's easy for things like drawing, which may feel very discretionary, or even an indulgence, can get squeezed out. Yeah, you know. So having a goal is great. Yeah, lots of daily practice at drawing circles. Yes, and yeah, absolutely. Period demon. I always have struggles with proportions and scale. Do you have any advice to improve? Okay, proportions and scale. The way I think of proportions is the ratio of height to width, or depending on the form, on the shape that we're looking at. But it's all the relative angles, the angles being the same, and the width to height being the same. So I could draw, oh dear, daily average 6 hours 57 minutes of screen time. So the ratio of this to that. So I could draw this half the size or twice the size, and the proportions are the same. If I don't get the proportions right, it might look taller and thinner, or it might look shorter and fatter. That's what happens when we don't get the proportions the same. Now, the scale is where the proportions are correct, but the relative size is different. So, for instance, okay, so I've got my phone and I got the boom box. Okay, now they're different shapes, they're different proportions, but that's okay. If I wanted to draw them both larger, but I end up drawing the boom box so that it's the same size as my drawing of the iPhone, even if they're both larger than they are here, if the boom box ends up being the same size, then the scale is wrong, because the boom box should be, more like 2/3 the height. So if I keep the scale correct, then the boom box, however large I draw them both, should be about 2/3 of the height of the iPhone, and it should be a little bit wider. Okay, so that's kind of scale. And I would say that if scale is a problem, then that's great, because scale can be easily worked on. Proportions can be easily worked on, in that we can break things down to very simple shapes to work on the proportion. If I want to work on proportion, then it's I'll tell you what, here's an exercise I'd do if I was wanting to work on proportion. I would draw a rectangle, and I'd start by keeping it simple. Maybe I would have the rectangle, um, say, a centimetre wide by 4 centimetres down. Okay, so the ratio is sort of 1 to 4. And I would draw it with a ruler and I'd put it as my reference, and then I would draw it freehand. And my aim would be to draw it the same size. I'd do that maybe 10 times. And if I was happy with the accuracy of drawing them the same size freehand, I would then try and draw it double size. Actually, I'd probably go half size first. So instead of doing it to 1 centimetre by 4 centimetres, I would do it half a centimetre by 2 centimetres. Now that's in my drawing. I wouldn't do that with the ruler. Like, I would still be drawing from my original reference because I'm wanting to look at it and draw it smaller, but keep it in proportion. So that's what I would do. And now I can actually measure my drawing because I know the measurement of the actual size. So I want my width to be that I've eyeballed, but I can check it to see if it's half the width, if it's half a centimeter. And then I check the length to see if it's 2 centimeters. And then I do the same thing the other way. I blow it up to twice the size. So instead of 4 centimeters, I'm drawing 8 centimeters. And instead of 1 centimeter, I'm going 2 centimeters. But I'm doing it freehand and I'm eyeballing it. But I'm trying to do it twice the size. Okay. And if I keep the shape simple, and if my starting shape is like whole numbers, then it's easy to check my estimations. And if when I try and draw it double size, it's not really double size. Maybe the width is double size, but the length is not double size. And so I've changed the proportions. Well, then I know I need to keep working on it. And so we can there's no point drawing a whole Musée du Louvre facade if the proportions are wrong, because even if all my details are well done, the underlying fault of being out of proportion is going to spoil it. So I may as well just work on the proportions without the overhead, without the baggage, without the commitment, without the effort of the detail until I can get it right or more right. And start with simple shapes because they're going to be easier to learn the skills I need to learn, easier to observe, easier to replicate with my pen, my pencil. Okay. If you're finding this helpful, if you haven't hit the like button yet, I'd really appreciate that. Okay, Christina, I was born with a low muscle tone, also intellectually disabled, plus I'm also on the spectrum. I've been told by family members and also by others that I will never be good enough. Oh, well, what an appalling thing and quite pointless thing for someone to tell you. We all start in different places. I see what artists can do and I want to learn, but I'm so frustrated because I can't do the simplest things like draw shapes. Well, look, there are different ways we can do drawings. Let me just see if I can find a drawing to show you. Where's the other one of these? Sorry, I'm literally just off camera. Here it is. Here it is. Okay. Like, here's a fairly recent drawing of a tree on Sydney Harbour, and I haven't drawn shapes really. I've used lots of lines to create effect. You see, like, yeah, I haven't drawn an outline. I haven't drawn a shape. I've done lines to create lights and dark values that create the effect of a tree, and also the water on Sydney Harbour, and also the low ridge across the harbour, and also a whole bunch of foliage that's closer to us than the tree. So it's not always, there are ways to draw where we're not outlining shapes. If I were to do cartoon, if I were to do comic work, then outlining shapes is, can be fairly significant in that. But there are other ways to draw as well. So you know. But Christina, start small. Start with simple things and work on those. You know, I see it over and over again. Where we see the work that other people have done, and so we see the possibilities of drawing, and that excites us and enthuses us, and inspires us. But sometimes it can mislead us into wanting to start halfway along the journey, you know. And it could well be, Christina. In fact, I'd say it almost certainly is that did you say they were family members um, are looking at people who've been drawing their whole life, looking at the artwork of people who've been drawing their whole life, and then looking at what you're doing and making these judgments, comparing the two. When, like, what does that mean? That means you're not as good as someone who's perhaps been drawing consistently for 30 years. Well, who's surprised by that? No one is. And that says nothing about where you can get. I would say just draw, but keep it simple. Simplified at the start for anyone, I would say that. Okay, all the best. Really wish you all the best with it, Christina. I really hope that drawing ends up being a thing that can bring you some joy in your day. Flame, what do I think of the future of art is now that AI is a thing? Oh, look, I'm old enough just to go, don't want to know about AI. Although I do feel very smug when I'm scrolling through memes and I think, nah, that's AI. That's AI. That's AI. And sometimes I check the comments and someone says, this is AI, fake AI. And I feel like, oh, well, I'm staying up with things. Yeah, look, I don't know. Machines have always been able to do things better than humans in some way. I mean, I don't know. I can get in the car and drive, but there are people who still want to run, like like do athletics. I can get in a boat, but people still have swimming races. Just because a machine can do something doesn't mean that it's better. Doesn't mean that it's the same. Um, I think it perhaps at times can make us think a bit harder about what is art. Um, is art the process? Is it still art if it's created by a machine, or is it something else? Is it more like a photograph? But then photographs can be certainly art. I'm not saying photographs aren't art, not at all. But a photograph's art because it's a person on the behind the camera. What if it's not a person behind the camera? I suppose at this point, anyway, I think there is still some sort of human input for AI to produce art, but I don't know. I'm depending on the sort of art I want to do, maybe AI can become competitive. Like if it's in a vocational sense, maybe AI can start to produce the sort of commercial art that perhaps I want, whether it's still or video, that I would have liked to have done. I don't know. There could be. I mean, I remember in the 70s when I was finishing school, um, word processing had just sort of become a thing, and printing, digital printing, well, digital printing was just becoming a thing, and suddenly all the typesetters were out of work. Because when I started high school, newspapers were set letter by letter. It's like what you see in the old westerns in the town newspaper. That was pretty much how papers were still being produced in the 70s when I was in high school. So yeah, that all changed like almost overnight. So things can change. Um, yeah, Adriano, Christina, maybe you have a Fantasia. hmm Possibly. Yeah, you know. But in the end, that still doesn't mean you can't explore and enjoy and improve and ask yourself after every drawing the same thing I ask myself: am I happy with this? Why? Why not? What focus can I have for my next drawing? Thank you. Thank you. I'm at six. So six 40-minute sessions. So, that if you missed it, that came from just the simple fact that if I learn in a drawing cycle, and if a drawing cycle is basically the time it takes me to choose a reference, do a drawing, critique the drawing, and work out, am I happy with it, and get a focus for my next drawing. If that's a learning cycle, then if I draw for 40 minutes to produce a drawing rather than 240 minutes, then I'm going to get more drawing cycles into my, maybe not my day, but certainly into my week or my month, and certainly into my life. And therefore, I will be learning more things more quickly. So it can be a mistake when we start to draw to try and do large drawings that take a long time to draw. And I would also say it's a mistake not to try and finish most of our drawings in one session, because drawing has a rhythm, it has a tempo. A drawing gathers momentum as we progress it. And if I stop halfway through for a week and then come back to it, I've lost all of that. And so my second half of the drawing things, where I'm pulling things together and I've developed a nice kind of rhythm and a loose style, and I'm feeling comfortable and confident and so forth, all of that tightens back now. And usually in the second half, I'm doing a lot more peripheral things as well. And so in my thinking, a nice kind of loose gestural style of drawing um, works better for those peripheral things. But I lose that if I've got a big chunk of time in between start and finish. What do you say are main differences between drawing foliage with pen and with pencil? Well, I did a video, I think it was last week. I actually drew this with a pencil first on one day because I hadn't drawn in pencil for so long, and I was just curious to see how it would be. And I came across this reference photo of this tree, which I took like 4 years ago, zoomed from across Sydney Harbour from a cafe on the top of a building. This tree is sort of just overlooks the Opera House, in fact. It's at the very tip of the Sydney Botanic Gardens. And then the next day I thought, I wonder how it would look in ink. And so I drew it again. Well, I don't know, there's that much difference. Now, of course, that's not saying there couldn't be, but for me, for my drawing, for my techniques and style and what I'm trying to achieve, there wasn't a huge amount of difference at all. But there are certain possibilities with each media or with each medium that pen or pencil that can be exploited, used, whatever word you like. Um, and so, potentially they could have looked more different. And if I were drawing more in pencil, then quite possibly I would explore the differences more, the potential that pencil has, as opposed to the potential that ink has, and just kind of duplicating that there. So yeah, but I probably don't really draw enough in pencil these days to be able to say more than that. It also depends too the time that you have to draw. If I only had minutes to capture a tree, I'd rather be drawing it probably with a pencil than with a pen, because you can just get more graphite on the paper more quickly than with a 0.2 millimeter fine liner. So, there are lots of variables about that. My bloody last hint. Oh, okay. So, Holman, you've been drawing while you listen. Corey, what's your favorite book on learning how to draw, and will you be coming out? Look, I've only ever read one book on how to draw, and that was Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain, which I think came out in the very early 80s. And that was the book that really hammered home to me the importance of observation, that if you haven't seen it, kind of one of the key things in the book is that it was this teacher, and she would give students a photo, a drawing of a portrait to copy at as their first lesson, and they would do it, and most of them were pretty ordinary. It's probably the kindest thing to say. And then they'd have whatever month of classes, um, and at some point they would have to redraw that first drawing, but they would be given the drawing upside down, and they had to draw it upside down. So they didn't get in that drawing session, they didn't get to see it the right way up. And they weren't allowed to turn the reference drawing the right way up or their drawing the right way up until they'd finished. And then, of course, what they could do was compare the two. And it was absolutely phenomenal. Actually, no, from memory, it was only like a week or two between the two drawings. And the difference was phenomenal. So much better. And and her point was that when it was the right way up, it was easy to look at it and think, "Oh, yeah, no, yeah, I know what an eye is, you know. Oh, it's the nose, yeah, I know what an eye no. Oh, a mouth, yeah, I can draw lips, you know." Whereas when it was upside down, while it was still vaguely familiar, it wasn't familiar enough that therefore they had to pay a lot more attention to what was in the upside down reference to then draw it upside down. And they had to really just draw by observation, like even like how far is the lip from the nose? Well, when it was upside down, they really had to pay attention because they couldn't presume they would just get it right. And of course, the reality was when they did presume that they could just get it right, they didn't. And that's why their first drawings, not that long before their second drawings, was so much less accurate. It's probably the kindest thing to say. And so it really hammered. So the difference between the two was that the upside down reference and the upside down drawing forced them to observe more carefully. Well, what do you think? Have you ever done it? I've run that as an exercise just with doing the upside down drawing, just for groups for different things over the years for sort of like a bit of relaxation as an easier session in something. And it's unbelievable how well people draw. And the hard thing was to get people to do it because this wasn't in the context of art or anything. And in fact, most people seem to have been scarred by their childhood school experiences or family experiences with the whole thing of drawing. Um, but I kind of would, you know, twist their arms and speak nicely and convince them it was just a bit of fun to have a go. And like so often they absolutely amazed themselves with how well they could draw because that actually spent time observing. So yeah, that's the only book really that I've read. When I talk about self-taught navigating my own, I never watched YouTube videos on drawing. I just drew and tried to work out what to do. Um, I might have come along a bit faster if I had, but as I said, at least as a teacher, trained school teacher, I understood how we learn, and that I think really gave me I talked earlier about how we can have day one of learning to draw two people, but they're not starting in the same place. And the fact that I was a trained teacher and I'd learned how to learn at a tertiary level, at a university level, actually gave me an advantage over someone who hadn't learned how we learn. And because it let me analyze what I was doing, perhaps in a more productive way, which sped things up. So that's kind of again my point that you can say, "Oh, you're so talented." Well, actually, I have a big advantage because I understand the learning process and I can apply that to drawing. And you don't know that because you didn't happen to come by the same route to get to this point that I have. You know, um, Proportion is only important if you try to draw. Yeah, but I would actually say that if you want to draw abstractly, if you want to introduce deliberate distortion to your drawing, I would say learning to draw without abstraction is the starting point of that. And then from that, that's the really, I think, secure foundation to be able to now go and play with, if you like, play with the rules, disregard the rules. But it's not to understand how to create realism. Now I can make deliberate choices to move off in other directions. Um, every day brings new surprise to what I draw because I allow imperfection, and the imperfection drives variety. Yeah, and like uh, responding to what we've done is always fun. Oztangle, middle distance is what I'm trying to draw better, that connection between far away and close. Yeah, yeah. Look, I can see that. Yeah, you know, when I have a reference, the first thing I do is I divide it into foreground, midground, and distance. And sometimes the midground might have 2 or 3 depths of plane in it. Um, and sometimes I'll even get a pen and I'll circle the things that are closest. If there's a few things very close, or I'll draw a line around the stepping back of the midground. So that can all be pretty useful to do. Yeah. Middle can be a challenge if there's a lot of middle and if there's a few depths of middle. And if there's a lot of middle ground, then creating depths in the middle planes can be helpful, and to do it quite deliberately. And so before I start to draw, I know what's the front half, the closer half of the middle. I know, and what's the back half of the middle. I know where the divide is, because that way I can now control my marks to create and accentuate the sense of depth. It's not just how much detail I draw. It's not just the size I draw, but it's the marks I choose to use to draw it. Yep. Let's see. I've heard about focusing on having good silhouettes. Perhaps I'm not utilizing that enough. Um, oh, hang on. I've gone down too far. Oh, I've gone down way far. Goodness, there's a whole lot more questions here than I realized. Okay, I'll move quickly because probably time is coming to an end. Um, yep, 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 yep. Hi, Stephen. Have you tried using grey fine liners for creating depth this week? Look, no, I haven't, and I keep meaning to, but I don't. You might know I've had long COVID for 2.5 years, and I haven't always got out much. And there are good days and bad days. So, but it's certainly one of the things I've been thinking of. There are some people I follow on Instagram, their artwork, and they use a range of not just grey, but sometimes sepia, and combining other colours as well. And I have been thinking, well, that's another way to do it, and it would be nice to try that. But what I do is I try and manipulate my use of the black either with the one pen or by changing pens. So I might use a zero point 0.5 for the foreground. I might use 0.3 and 0.2 for maybe 2 depths of midground. I might use a zero point 0.1 for the distance. And in some ways that creates the same effect. But I have been intending to, next time I'm somewhere where there are some grey pens in the brand that I use, to buy them, but I just haven't seen any. I'll probably have to go into the city to a much larger art shop for that. So it's a good thought, but it's really another way of coming at the same effect, instead of just trying to do a lighter, finer line in black, but actually to not worry so much about the line width, but change the value of the line by actually having a different color. Um, yeah, German agree with me about the talent. Yeah, I mean, it's so easy not to see the work that someone's put in. Um, and it's not that ours in itself produce results, but it's hours thoughtfully, wisely, strategically put in. And that's why we can keep doing the same thing and not improve, because we're not making the changes we need to make to improve. We've kind of hit the wall for doing things the way we do them. And that starts with my understanding of the drawing process, as well as then any actual skills involved. Um, you know, it is the definition of insanity to keep doing the same thing and to expect different results. And so if I'm really not happy with how my drawings look, and if I feel that I've stopped improving, then I need to, it's not that I can't improve. I'm sure it's not that I'm perfect. Then I need to change some things in my process, in my thinking. And it's those changes that will hopefully start to create the place where the improvement can happen. Um, how do I increase drawing speed without losing accuracy? Well, I don't go faster than I can accurately go. That's basically it. Uh, there's a difference between fast and gestural and careless. And it's really important that I make sure I don't cross that line. It becomes careless when I haven't observed enough. I'm going so fast that I'm not actually, I've sped up my observation past what's helpful. It's careless if I can't control where I put the lines and marks to create the effect I want. So, I mean, certainly we can improve the speed of our mark making through practice, because we can get better, more confident, and more accurate more quickly at what we do. But there is a point where you know we've lost control, and that probably isn't a place that's going to be particularly helpful for improvement. So, I think the trick, the answer the question to um, um, yeah. So I just lost track of where I was at. Um, yeah, and you draw faster by simplification, not by me nearly drawing faster. Yeah, learning to simplify is also a skill. Learning what details to that we can leave out, or we can just sort of suggest. But it's always staying in control. That's pretty key. Um, yeah, there is a muscle memory, and there is, I think, a connection between seeing an angle in a reference and almost intuitively knowing how to move your arm across the page to get that angle with the pen. But it's not that it's magic. It's not that it's luck. It's just that I've learnt it to the point where I don't have to consciously think about it. So often when we speak, we don't consciously have to think about what we're trying to say, because repetition has put us in the place where a lot of things start to happen almost intuitively, almost by themselves. But it's not really that, of course. It's just that we're very well practiced in those things. Um, when you don't need to think about how to make your accent. Well, it just depends whether it's something that I've got marks for. But yes, if I'm drawing the same sorts of subjects over and over again for a period, for a season, then I can start to really build on the kind of muscle memory, the hand-eye coordination, and simply the confidence too, when I'm making the marks that they're going to work out. And confidence is really important in my mark making. If I'm not confident, hesitancy does not help us put the marks on the paper that we want. So in a way, we always are putting our head on the chopping block. We're always taking a risk. And if I am very conscious that I'm just doing drawing practices, just I'm learning a skill, then that's not quite so hard. But if I feel like I'm producing an artwork, or I need to, then that's a real pressure that's going to be very counterproductive to my
my drawing development. Um, do I have any explicit tips for growing my ability to design characters? And why do I call a Bluetooth speaker a boombox? Uh, I think it's actually a Wonder Boom. I think that's just the brand. I think it comes up as Wonder Boom on the computer drop down. Uh, so, look, I still think it's magic. So I'm the wrong person to ask any questions. Don't, you know, my children roll their eyes sometimes at how I describe things. Um, Look, I'm sorry, I've never tried to design characters. So look, it's I would be stepping totally out of any experience. So I'll just enjoy the characters that other people draw. I've not really gone into the comic world as an adult. As a kid, I loved, and as a teenager, I loved comics, and as a kid, I loved Astro Boy. When it was first shown in Australia in the mid '60s, the original black and white Astro Boy. I wanted to be Astro Boy, and Astro Boy wanted to be a real boy. Just can't please people, can we? Embrace your mistakes. Doodling a lot lets the pen just do what you do. Yep. And look, as we um, not every line's going to be perfect, but when we persevere through that part, we learn to incorporate things in ways that we wouldn't learn if every line were perfect, and that's a big part of the drawing process. Also, a photo isn't stealing info from others' work. There's that too. Yeah. Do you mean copyright? And that's really important. Yeah. On YouTube, I take all my own photos so that I never have to worry about copyright issues. And that's why I can post them on my community page, my reference photos, for you to use if you want, because I'm the photographer and therefore I own the copyright of my photos. For most of my Instagram drawings, I've used the photos from about a dozen different Paris photographers whose permission I asked, could I use their photos to draw from for my Instagram drawings, and that I would always credit them. And they graciously said yes. So I continue to do that as well. So, and I'm always one to acknowledge when people say, "Oh, amazing perspective, great composition." I try and say, "Hey, that's the photographer." Maybe I cropped it slightly, but basically it's the photographer, not me. Yeah, we do need to recognize that copyright is on artworks, and just because I'm drawing from a photo doesn't mean that still breaks copyright. That's a copyright infringement, because I've used their creative work as a starting point for mine. And if I do that without their permission, now, of course, I can do it for educational purposes and stuff if I'm just teaching myself to draw. But if I'm going to post it on social media, I shouldn't do that without their permission. And crediting after the event is not the same as having permission. So